Good evening and welcome to our daily devotional reading. A special welcome to the members of our make-believe monastery. And to those just dropping in, let me maybe inform you what you have dropped into. We are reading this year through the collected works of Plato in 1 year. It comes down to about 4 pages a day. I have just recorded this, but I lost it somehow. It's not in my trash or anywhere, so I'm redoing this. So if I seem a bit impatient, you know why. I don't know what I did. That being said, let's take our time. We do have time to redo. We don't always get the opportunity to redo things. My voice is already gone. To redo things in life, so we should be happy when we do. Then let's turn inward. Drop into the silence inside ourselves. Open our minds and our hearts and listen to Plato. Stranger. Let us begin by considering the whole nature of excess and defect, and then we shall have a rational ground on which we may praise or blame too much length or too much shortness in discussions of this kind. Young Socrates. Let us do so. Stranger. The points on which I think we ought to dwell are the following. What? Length and shortness, excess and defect. With all of these, the art of measurement is conversant. Yes, and the art of measurement has to be divided into 2 parts, with a view to our present purpose. Where shall you make the division? As thus. I would make 2 parts, one having regard to the relativity of greatness and smallness to each other, and there is another without which the existence of production would be impossible. What do you mean? Do you not think that it is only natural for the greater to be called greater with reference to the less alone, and the less with reference to the greater alone? Yes. Well, but is there not also something exceeding and exceeded by the principle of the mean, both in speech and action? And is not this a reality and the chief mark of difference between good and bad men? Plainly, then we must suppose that the great and small exist and are discerned in both these ways, and not, as we were saying before, only relatively to one another, but there must also be another comparison of them with a mean or ideal standard. Would you like to hear the reason why? Certainly. If we assume the greater to exist only in relation to the less, there will never be any comparison of either with the mean. True. And would not this doctrine be the ruin of all the arts and their creations? Would not the art of the statesman and the aforesaid art of weaving disappear? For all these arts are on the watch against excess and defect. not as unrealities but as real evils, which occasions a difficulty in action. And the excellence or beauty of every work of art is due to this observance of measure. Certainly. But if the science of the statesman disappears, the search for the royal science will be impossible. Very true. Well then, as in the case of the sophist, we extorted the inference that not being had an existence, because here was the point at which the argument eluded our grasp. So in this we must endeavour to show that the greater and less are not only to be measured with one another, but also have to do with the production of the mean. For if this is not admitted, neither a statesman nor any other man of action can be an undisputed master of his science. Yes, we must certainly do again what we did then. But this, Socrates, is a greater work than the other, of which we only too well remember the length. I think, however, that we may fairly assume something of this sort. What? That we shall some day require this notion of the mean, with a view to the demonstration of absolute truth. Meanwhile, the argument that the very existence of the arts must be held to depend on the possibility of measuring more or less, not only with one another, but also with a view to the attainment of the mean, seems to afford a grand support and satisfactory proof of the doctrine which we are maintaining. For if there are arts, there is a standard of measure. And if there is a standard of measure, there are arts. But if either is wanting, there is neither. True. And what is the next step? The next step clearly is to divide the art of measurement into two parts, as we have said already, and to place in the one part all the arts which measure number, length, depth, breadth, swiftness, and their opposites, and to have another part in which they are measured with the mean, and the fit, and the opportune, and the due, and with all those words, in short, which denote a mean or standard removed from the extremes. Here are two vast divisions embracing two very different spheres. There are many accomplished men, Socrates, who say, believing themselves to speak wisely, that the art of measurement is universal and has to do with all things. And this means that we are now saying for all things which come within the province of art do certainly in some sense partake of measure. But these persons, because they are not accustomed to distinguish classes according to real forms, jumble together two widely different things, relation to one another and to standard, under the idea that they are the same, and also fall into the converse error of dividing other things not according to their real parts. Whereas the right way is, if a man has first seen the unity of things, to go on with the inquiry and not desist until he has found all the differences contained in it which form distinct classes. Nor again should he be able to rest contented with the manifold diversities which are seen in a multitude of things until he has comprehended all of them that have any affinity with the bounds of one similarity and embraced them within the reality of the single kind. But we have said enough on this head, and also on excess and defect, and have only to bear in mind that two divisions of the art of measurement have been discovered which are concerned with them, and not forget what they are. We will not forget. And now that this discussion is completed, let us go on to consider another question which concerns not this argument only, but the conduct of such arguments in general. What is this new question? Take the case of a child who is engaged in learning his letters. When he is asked what letters make up a word, should we say that the question is intended to improve his grammatical knowledge of that particular word, or of all words? Clearly, in order that he may have a better knowledge of all words. And is our inquiry about the statesman intended only to improve our knowledge of politics, or of our power of reasoning generally? Clearly, as in the formal example, the purpose is general. Stranger, still less would any rational man seek to analyze the notion of weaving for its own sake. But people seem to forget that some things have sensible images, which are readily known and can be easily pointed out when anyone desires to answer an inquirer without any trouble or argument, whereas the greatest and highest truth have no outward image of themselves visible to man, which he who wishes to satisfy the soul of the inquirer can adapt to the eye of sense. And therefore we ought to train ourselves to give and accept a rational account of them. For immaterial things, which are the noblest and greatest, are shown only in thought and idea, and in no other way. And all that we are now saying is said for the sake of them. Moreover, there is always less difficulty in fixing the mind on small matters than on great. Very good. Let us call to mind the bearing of all this. What is it? I wanted to get rid of an impression of tediousness which we may have experienced in the discussion about weaving and the reversal of the universe, and in the discussion concerning the sophist and the being or of not being. I know that they were felt to be too long, and I reproached myself with this, fearing that they might be not only tedious but irrelevant. And all that I have now said is only designed to prevent the recurrence of any such disagreeables for the future. Very good. Will you proceed? Then I would like to observe that you and I, remembering what has been said, should praise or blame the length or shortness of discussions, not by comparing them with one another, but with what is fitting, having regard to the part of measurement which, as we said, was to be borne in mind. Very true. And yet not everything is to be judged even with a view to what is fitting, for we should only want such a length as is suited to give pleasure, if at all, as a secondary matter, and reason tells us that we should be contented to make the ease or rapidity of an inquiry not our first but our second object, the first and highest of all being to assert the great method of division according to species. Whether the discourse be shorter or longer is not to the point. No offence should be taken at length, but the longer and the shorter are to be employed indifferently, according as either of them is better calculated to sharpen the wits of the auditors. Reason would also say to him who censures the length of discourses on such occasions and cannot away with their circumlocution, that he should not be in such a hurry to have done with them, when he can only complain that they are tedious, but he should prove that if they had been shorter, they would have made those who took part in them better dialecticians and more capable of expressing the truth of things. About any other praise and blame he need not trouble himself. He should pretend not to hear them. But we have had enough of this, as you will probably agree with me in thinking. let us return to our statesman and apply to his case the aforesaid example of weaving. Very good, let us do as you say. Thus far our scripture of the evening, an intermezzo tonight. I didn't write this down the previous time, I just spoke of it, so I'm going to speak of it now. This judging a discourse, a dialogue, if you're going to judge it by its length, then how good the length was, whether it was short or long, in teaching people, in making them better dialecticians and more capable of expressing the truth of things. Sometimes you need to pressure people into saying in 4 words what other people can't say in a book. And other times you need them to take their time and elaborate. To better communicate what needs to be communicated. Okay. I did write a lot down the previous time. I'll start at the end again. The last bit where the Eleatic stranger is defending his discourse, I couldn't help but think, because I have heard, and I believe it was John, but I might be mistaken, who said something about the dialogues of Plato having been read at the academy and then used as material for further discourse. And so I'm imagining, I have no ground to base it on except for my own imagination, that Plato maybe was accused of being a little bit long-winded, is that a word? Slow to develop his argument, irrelevant at times, tedious, and that this words of the Eleatic stranger and his defense of himself is also in a way a defense of Plato of himself. I don't know, but I imagine. The ideal or the mean as a measurement comes in here, and again I see Aristotle. And I think we do both the men an injustice by separating them too strictly. We have 2 hands, and one hand can point upwards and one hand can point or hover over the earth. We do not need to separate these things. We do not need to separate these men. Also the standard of measure, that a standard of measure is needed for any art. And I was thinking of the art of living and how we are quite at a loss for a standard of living, because it's no good comparing ourselves to a great or small. There needs to be a standard. And maybe it's just nature speaking through me. It's been speaking through me a lot with all this immersing in him. And not necessarily in a positive way. I find myself making ad hominem attacks on people's views. But if the philosophy of a person is a reflection of his character. Oh, yes, I was speaking of this measurement, a standard, an ideal for the art of living. And maybe we are in a fortunate position actually for being able to create our own values, set our own standards. But please, please be careful and be wise in what you choose. Choose your loves carefully. I wrote down knowing the parts to know the whole when he spoke of the letters learned so that it can know all words. I think that's an interesting path to go down, but I will not go down that path tonight. That sounds like something that could be left for the more mystical meditations. I also wrote down general because that word popped up today a couple of times, so I just thought I'll mention it. And the noblest and greatest of all things cannot be seen or experienced through the senses. And I'm not sure that even a materialist will argue, maybe they will, but the noblest and greatest of all things surely are things like love and the bonds between us and knowledge. So much that cannot be seen. I spoke much more earlier, but I'm going to leave you there and pray that it doesn't disappear again, because it was recording. I just pressed the wrong button, I imagine, and I don't know what I did. Anyway, here's to second chances. May the spirit of Sophia be with you.